At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Anthony, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Doug. It's good to be here with you. I appreciate you inviting me on your show.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It's really funny. Initially, when I was living in the U.S. and doing these, most of the people I talk to are from the U.S. And now I'm talking to people from all over the world. And where are you living at this point in time?
Well, I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I'm from the U.S., and we are living in Rome, Italy.
Wow, that's fantastic. I imagine you love that there.
Yeah, we do. We do. We live in an area called Castelli Romani, which is about half an hour outside of Rome, and I take the train into work and then the bus. It's a good lifestyle being in a small town here in Italy.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, what I'd love for you to do, I find it always fascinating to hear the story behind where what you're doing. And so if you can share with the audience kind of the background of who you are, what brought you to doing what you're doing, and talk a little bit about what you're doing, talk about the book that you've just written, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So I'm originally from DC. I grew up there. I went to Berkeley to go to college, and with a lot of the family dysfunction happening in my life, I probably would have gone further if I was a better swimmer. Then I came back to Washington, and I ended up joining the Peace Corps, and so I went to Kenya. I was there for 2 years in a small region, and about 3 hours inland from Mombasa, as a teacher, and then I went and did a lot of community development work there. I came back to the States, did my master's at Harvard at their public policy school, focusing on leadership. And it was between the public policy school and Harvard Business School. And yeah, and then I actually, 3 weeks after the graduation, I was back in Kenya. I had started my first nonprofit organization, which I grew to over $15 million in revenues. We had about 40 staff, and set up divisions in Kenya, Tanzania, Guatemala, Indonesia, Oakland, California, Washington, D.C., teaching disadvantaged youth how to start businesses and how to find employment and linking them with each other. So this was really the early days of the internet, where these young people for example, in rural Kenya could connect with young people in rural Indonesia and in inner city Oakland, California, Washington, D.C. So I was running that organization for about 9 years. Then I moved on to the board, found someone else to run it. And what I started to realize is that I really had a passion for writing. And at the same time, I also realized that the point of starting the organization was not to run it myself forever. I guess you could say I'm kind of a serial social entrepreneur. Like I really wanted to create it, but then I found that running it was not my passion. A lot of my time was fundraising, managing people, and I was really curious more about how to run an organization than actually running one, which may sound strange, but I felt like as a nonprofit leader, no one really showed me what to do, and I didn't really, reading the books on it is kind of like playing basketball or tennis. You can't just study about it. You got to go out and do it. And so I learned on the fly, and just became very curious about that. I also became very curious about personal development. I think based on some of the really challenging circumstances I had growing up in Washington, and so I started writing books. I started doing leadership development programs for other nonprofit leaders. It's funny, I went to the head of the management center in San Francisco, a guy named Bob Walker, and I went to him like, hey, I'm thinking of transitioning out of this organization, after being there for the 9 years. And I have this idea, like, what if we were to develop a leadership development program for nonprofit leaders based on the same experiential education principles? So instead of, you can't really dictate to leaders, leaders don't like to be led. So what if it was really like, instead of bringing them certain abilities and ideas, bringing out the abilities within them through a very interactive experiential model? And he says, well, that sounds good. Why don't you go ahead and do it in October? We'll recruit everyone for you. And I was just blew my mind, like, really? So that was my first opportunity. And then that led to, I did these programs from there to India, Mexico, actually done them in over 20 countries since then. And so I've been a leadership trainer for the last 30 years. And then I decided somewhere around, somewhere around my mid 40s, I'm 58 now, somewhere around my mid 40s, I, really realized that, like, I just couldn't keep doing these keynotes and leadership speeches anymore, because I felt like I was just regurgitating the same information over and over again. And I felt like I wasn't backing up what I shared with credible research. So it was really, at that point, it was either going to be a midlife crisis or a PhD. And I ended up with both. So I went to Barcelona, did my doctorate at ESA Business School, focusing on emotion and leadership. And I continued doing leadership trainings for Fortune 500 companies like Google, Apple, Toyota, Boeing, most of the world's largest nonprofits like Save the Children, CARE, and so forth. A lot of political leaders like government ministers of G20 governments, mayors. They would come to Washington, D.C. for a few days of personalized executive coaching. And so at that point, really, that's around the time that I married my wife, who's from Mexico. And that decision and doing the PhD are really the two best decisions I've ever made, because they led to a really huge inflection point. And now we've got two children, and they're trilingual in Italian, Spanish, English, and I'm teaching at Luis Business School in Rome. I'm running their Center for Sustainable Leadership. I do now about 4 pro bono nonprofit leadership conferences every year. They're like 2 to 3 day conferences in Africa and Latin America, also in Europe, done them in Rome and Amsterdam. Usually we have about 150 to 200 nonprofit leaders. In Europe, it's more like around 60 or 70. And I bring in a lot of other professors, which is actually turns out to be not so hard to do, to get them to volunteer, because I start off with, hey, I'm volunteering. I do this pro bono. I'd love for leaders to be exposed to the really cutting edge research you're doing. And so we get these wonderful people to come in, and we fly them all over the world. They come with me to Africa, to Latin America. In Mexico last August, we had 19 thought leaders, half of them from Mexico, half from the US and Europe. And we did a 3-day leadership conference for about 225 Mexican nonprofits. So yeah, I got to say, I mean, I really love it. It's on the one hand, I love to write. I guess the only words about writing that have really, cut so close to my heart more than any other would be Gloria Steinem. She once said, writing is the only thing that when I'm doing it, I don't feel like doing anything else. And that's how it feels for me.
Go ahead. Let me ask you a question about that, because it's interesting. You've done all of this leadership training and, nonprofits and so on and so forth. And yet you've written this book, Love and Suffering, which maybe that's leadership training, but it sounds to me, and hopefully it's a little bit more on a personal level for generalized population.
Well, that's exactly right. So I kind of walk this tightrope between personal development and leadership development. And at the end of the day, if you think about any leader you've ever met where you thought, I'd really like to join this person, I'd really like to work with this person, it's probably because you found them to be a person of really good character, a person with really good values, a person you like to hang out with, regardless of whether you're working together. And so I would say all of the leadership principles I teach and that I've researched, they're really about a confluence between personal character and and our socio-emotional abilities, how we interact with others. So love and suffering is I go really, so I teach leadership. I also teach organizational psychology at Luis Business School, and I've lectured on these topics at Harvard, Stanford, Georgetown, and they're really, to be a good leader. The saying I really like is that to be a good leader on the outside, you first have to become a good leader on the inside. So it's really about how we approach our relationship, starting with our relationship with ourselves. So love and suffering is really about that. Like I have what I call the four plateaus to reach a state of love, and I integrate psychological research, the latest psychological research on these plateaus, which are acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And each plateau has an obstacle that has to be overcome. So to reach a state of acceptance, we have to overcome suffering. To reach forgiveness, we overcome resentment. To reach gratitude, we overcome judgment. And to reach a state of love, we overcome what I call incarceration, which we can get to later if you like. But it's really about, I think a lot of people, and myself included sometimes, we kind of walk around with our eyes covered by our hands, and we cry about how dark it is. And so I think with love and suffering, my attempt is to help people to remove their hands from in front of their eyes, see the light, the love that's in front of them, but that we often overlook.
Well, and I kind of smile when you talk about the first step is overcoming suffering, because that is definitely a Buddhist concept, which I
Right.
which
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
yeah.
here.
Yeah,
Which
Buddhism,
is
that there's suffering and there's the cessation of suffering. Yeah, so so I'm not like one specific religion. I believe in God, but I'm more spiritual than religious. But I think a lot of our world's most attended and popular religions have this construct of suffering and then love or passion emerging from it. So, for example, in African cultures, you have the phoenix rising. So not just religious, but cultural context. You have the phoenix rising from the ashes. You have in fact, if you look at the word suffering, a lot of people don't know this, but the etymology of the word suffering comes from pati in Latin, or patire, which means to suffer. So, for example, in Christianity, we have the crucifixion, the suffering, the passion of Christ. I think about, in the leadership coaching I've done, I think about this woman who came to me once. She's a marketing director of a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company, and she told me, she said, I have trouble, Tony, waking up and just going to my job. That's how much I dislike it. And I just don't feel authentic there. I don't enjoy it. And so I asked her to share, kind of from a psychoanalytical perspective, share about how she grew up, like what's important to her and why. And so she, over the next 45 minutes or so, shared with me a long story about her childhood and how it really wasn't much of a childhood for her, because most of it was spent nurturing her father before he passed away from cancer when she was 12, like her and her mother taking care of her dad. And so I worked with her on making a career change. And I would say to your listeners, like, see if you can guess what she's doing now, what kind of career change she made.
yeah,
Well,
probably a nurse, right?
she's actually now the director of a major hospital, leading a
Wow.
team of researchers doing research on cancer and other diseases and illnesses. So fewer families suffer the way hers did. And okay, so now I'll share just a little bit about my own story. So I grew up with a stepfather who was physically abusive, and when a man, I was 10, 11, and he would throw me down on a radiator, and it almost broke my back one time. I'd walk funny coming to school, and it was not a good time. And when a man comes into your home who's not your father, sleeps with your mother and beats you up, you don't feel like much of a person. Well, that's how I grew up. And so that suffering, which it's interesting because our first instinct is for me, for example, would be to resent him, and I resented him for decades. And I realized that was preventing me from going anywhere in my life. So resentment actually comes from which is again, and sentire, which is to feel anger again and again and again until we become paralyzed. And I didn't want to live that way anymore. So I realized I had to forgive him less for him than for myself, just so that I could move forward in my life. One thing I write about in Love and Suffering is that the difference between forgiveness and trust is that forgiveness is necessary for personal development, is necessary so we can move forward in our own lives. Trust is necessary for relationship development. If we don't trust someone, the relationship cannot continue. But I wasn't choosing to continue a relationship with him. Is I wasn't going to resent him anymore, but I wasn't exactly going to go look him up and say, hey, let's go grab a beer. It was more that I needed to forgive him for my own sake. It's interesting because we have all these myths that we're exposed to in our lives. Like, for example, forgive and forget. That's some of the worst advice I've ever heard. I would say forgive and remember. Now, don't make it like the core thing in your prefrontal cortex that you're thinking about every day. But it's kind of like if you're walking home at night and you fall into a ditch, I don't know what advice you'd want from a personal development author, but I would certainly say it might be a good idea to remember where that ditch is. Right?
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
go ahead, Doug. Yeah, sorry.
What I find fascinating is as you talk about forgiveness and how important that is, it reminds me that if we've not forgiven someone, we almost position ourselves in that victim mode. And, when you get into the behavioral analysis and you get into this whole concept of emotions, you recognize that victim is way down there on that scale. And if we tend to find that often in our lives, we never rise to the level where we can really experience that joy, that love, that type of thing. So I find that fascinating. So as you go through the suffering, and you say how to overcome the suffering to some degree is to move into forgiveness. And then once you've learned to move into forgiveness and start to experience a different beingness, then what's the next step in the book beyond forgiveness?
Well, I'm glad you said that about being in this sort of victim position, because that is what I was really thinking about when I was thinking when we move from resentment to forgiveness, it's really taking ourselves out of the victim role. It's being able to say what I write about in Love and Suffering around forgiveness. One of the strategies is that to forgive is to give for. So my stepfather could not give me what I needed from him as a young boy. Of course, it was the opposite. But I finally chose to give for him to myself. Like, okay, he couldn't give that to me. I started to look into what was his life like. He was unemployed. He felt like society, he was a journalist who'd become unemployed, felt like society had kind of chewed him up and spit him out. And so the only semblance of power he could access in his life was to feel like he was acting in a dominant role with an 11-year-old boy. Okay, so that's where he was. And the thing though about forgiveness is that a lot of us think there's even quotes by very famous thinkers like Niebuhr about like that forgiveness is the highest form of love, and I disagree with that because forgiveness also has its challenges. So if we go from resentment to forgiveness, that's a good space to be in, right? To forgive someone. But we also have to recognize that forgiveness is impossible without judgment. You cannot forgive someone unless you have first judged them. If you don't judge them in the first place, there's no need for forgiveness.
Yeah.
So this is the irony is that, and let's think about forgiveness language. Okay, so let's suppose you have a friend, or let's say you're in an intimate relationship, and the other person says to you, Doug, you know what? my life was really horrible because of what you've done. You really made me miserable. It's never been the same. I just haven't had a good, this has been horrible for me, but I want you to know that I forgive you. Do you want someone to say that to you? Because I certainly don't. Um,
No.
and and that's the thing is that there is a more exalted state than forgiveness, which is really one of the core messages of love and suffering, which is we can go from forgiveness and move up into gratitude. So
Okay.
if we take away the judgment. So for example, okay, look, I had a physically abusive stepfather. That was no fun, right? For those years. But hey, I'm here talking with you. I'm not like working on Wall Street, having my fourth affair on my third wife, not even really knowing who my children are. That's not my life. Because of that suffering that I went through, because of of that feeling of not being safe as a young boy, my passion it emanates from that. Like so feeling powerless as a child, my personal vision is to help others to feel powerful, to access the power that's rightfully theirs. Again, as long as they remove their hands from their eyes and see what's possible right in front of them. That wakes me up every day. That's my motivation to come in and do podcasts, to write books, to write articles, to do research, to teach. And I'm grateful for it. So believe it or not, I can honestly tell you, I'm grateful for my stepfather, my ex-stepfather. Fortunately, they actually he's not alive anymore. But they my mother divorced him decades ago, and fortunately, she's now been very happily married for over 3 decades. But so moving to gratitude. I guess one visualization I would recommend for your listeners or viewers is think back to when you were in grade school or high school or university, and think back to the person you would consider the greatest teacher you've ever had, right? And imagine that you're going back to that classroom or that dance hall or that sports field, and you have one more chance before you continue on with your life. Before you're leaving, you get up from your desk or the bleachers, wherever you're sitting, you have a chance to turn around and look at that teacher. What would you want to say to your greatest teacher if you have the chance? And when I do this visualization in my conferences, what people say time and time again is, well, I would say thank you. And this is the thing, is that some people come in our lives to help us enjoy our vision, enjoy our life vision and the values that we have. Other people come in our lives to help us refine that life vision and those values. And my ex-stepfather came into my life to help me refine that vision I had for my life and make a huge change. But I couldn't do it until I stopped resenting him and was willing to forgive him. So that forgiveness became that step, a critical step on moving forward in my life toward gratitude and being grateful that I had this experience. Think about how many people you know that have really troubled relationships, and when they finally get out of the relationship, they just resent this person for wasting those years of their lives. And I think it's actually the opposite that should take place. Like, be grateful that you had this other person to step in the ring with you of how relationships work and learn what you're not looking for. And if you're lucky, a few things you are looking for.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I can guarantee you, anyone that is out there really making a difference in people's lives, similar to your story, they have all experienced some type of trauma in their lives. And yet they were the ones that went from victimhood to forgiveness to gratitude. And I can't tell you how many times as we've talked about that, it is that whole point that when they can look back at those experiences and realize that that's what led them to this purpose of being able to make a difference in other people's lives, then that gratitude sets in. And it's amazing to me that you've hit it right on the head, but it's amazing that people don't understand that, once they can get rid of that resentment, forgive, and be grateful, it makes all the difference in the world in their lives.
You're right on target there, Doug. And I'll share with you, as a leadership coach, every CEO or senior leader that comes to see me is because they're stuck in one way or another. And the only way I've ever found to get them unstuck is to realize that they're stuck because there's someone in their life that they need to forgive. There's always someone that they've never been able to forgive. And so for example, a CEO of actually a multinational in Europe who came and spent some time with me. And the challenge he faced is that he was always really hard on his employees and always held them to standards that he couldn't even really achieve himself. And so he really had trouble keeping people. His attrition rates were extremely high. He came to see me, and what he realized after we did some coaching is that that's how his father had been with him. That's all he knew for how to be in a leadership role, how to guide others, was to be extremely exacting. And it wasn't until he could forgive his own father for holding to unreasonable expectations, unrealistic expectations, that he could actually let go of it and move toward feeling gratitude for his father and ultimately love for his father, who he'd resented his whole life. And so this is the thing. You hit the nail on the head, Doug, when you talked about that the people that you know that have really been able to sustainably engender positive change in their lives for others. It's because, first of all, they've experienced some trauma which led them down this path in the first place, as opposed to that other path, again, of like not knowing your family and having all these affairs and just basically being narcissistic, which probably my life would have gone down that path otherwise, because I had that kind of strategic way of thinking. I still do. I just channel it toward personal social change than for just trying to exploit people. And so taking that trauma and transforming it into post-traumatic growth. And so in Love and Suffering, I go deep into the research of Richard Calhoun, Lawrence Tedeschi, who are really the two psychologists at the University of North Carolina who created the concept of post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is really when you experience trauma. Well, one of three things tends to happen. So first thing is nothing. Some people experience trauma and just doesn't make much change in them. For some reason, they have this superhuman capacity to just kind of deflect it, although that's really rare. What they tend to do instead is they numb themselves to any kind of negative feeling, but that also cuts out any positive feelings. And so they just kind of go through life a little bit robotic, just in kind of a sterile, antiseptic life approach where they don't really experience the ups and downs so much, which I wouldn't recommend for anyone. The other two more common outcomes when someone goes through trauma, the first is that they get taken under, they're traumatized and they can't get out of it. And I would say, I do a lot of research on trauma. I've interviewed hundreds of police officers and counselors, psychologists, and people that are experiencing tremendous trauma. And a lot of people, they are traumatized, but at kind of moderate levels where it ends up manifesting in like spousal abuse, alcohol, drug abuse, a lot of dysfunctional behaviors. But they're still able to function on some level with their jobs and society. Yet they really could be, they're surviving, but they're not thriving. And then there's those people who are able to grow from trauma. And so post-traumatic growth is for those people. It's about those people. And what they do is, based on the trauma, they have a psychological way of transforming the way they see the world, the way they see themselves, spirituality, relationships, their priorities, everything changes because they've been able to not only to experience the trauma and not only to acknowledge they've experienced, but to process it. So that all begins with acceptance. Like I've got the story in Love and Suffering of of a pilot who goes to Vietnam, and he's he gets, and he's a POW, and literally goes from like, he's got a couple kids, he's at home in his suburban home watching television, and a few weeks later he's drafted, he's in Vietnam, and he's caught, and he's in this like rat and insect and mosquito ridden cell. He's emaciated, and he just can't accept it. He's really gonna die, and somewhere he ends up hearing this voice, and this voice says to him, "This is your life. It's inescapable. This is your life." And that stays with him. And he starts to accept that this is his situation. And from there, it's an inflection point, and everything starts to change for him. He starts to exercise. He starts to check in with the other POWs and talks with them. How are they doing? As much as they can connect in that situation. And he ends up outliving the end of the war, and having of course a much better life once he's freed and reunited with his family. But I think it's a wonderful story. This is your life. Like, what if I would challenge your viewers, your listeners, what is the writing on the wall that you haven't been able to accept? What in what dimension of your life would it be useful for you now to pretend that you're hearing this voice that says, this is your life, and just accepting this is a situation you're dealing with? I'll give you an example, Doug. A lot of people don't like the direction the world is moving in right now. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is very ubiquitous globally. And when I tell people, well, the first step is to accept it. This is what's happening. Well, what people say to me is like, well, wait, but if I accept it, doesn't that mean I'm condoning it? And I'm like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. Acceptance is not passivity. Acceptance is the foundation for self-change. By accepting, you're saying, okay, this is the writing on the wall. This is the real information I have right now. This is what's happening outside my door. And from there, you can then say, okay, well, now that you're armed with this real information, instead of the sort of fabrications we tell ourselves so we won't get upset, then with that real information, now you can envision, you can develop your vision of how you want to move forward in your life, and you can put it into action.
Well, and you talk about that, and I think that from that goes the next step, which is love. And I'm thinking from a Christian standpoint, you have the saying, love God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And everyone forgets that you can't love someone else unless you love yourself first, bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question, I think that is the hardest thing for people to do. I mean, as you say, we see the turmoil that's going on right now. When I'm on social media and see the comments that are made and the anger that's expressed on both sides, it's amazing to me that somewhere along the line we've lost the ability to love our neighbors. And I suspect they don't love ourselves in order to not love your neighbors. So how does someone learn to develop love for themselves, love for a higher power, love for God and for this earth and all the beauty that's here in the nature, and then how to love our neighbors?
Well, let's go to the father of Joey, who Joey was was the guy, or one of the guys who tried to apprehend the shooter who came into a bowling alley and I think killed like 20 people. One of the mass shootings over the last year and a half or two, and it was in the United States, and Joey's father, Joey was killed by the shooter. He went while he tried to apprehend him, and Joey's father, he did an interview on CNN, I think it was, and he said, like, I'm not going to hate this person. So I'm not going to hate this man. I'm not going to let him ruin my life like he ruined my son's life. He said he must have, I coming from a Christian perspective, he shared, I was taught to love my neighbor and to love others, and that's what we grew up with. And I see that this man was ill and he didn't get exposed to what I had been exposed to. And I just thought that was beautiful. And we think about loving our neighbors. One thing we have to realize is that it's not just the failings of human nature that are leading to our inability to love our neighbors. There's other effects that are being wrought on society right now. So even if we just look at how we use technology, so there was one study at University of Cambridge where they looked at which comments by politicians are forwarded or liked and in on social media, Facebook and Twitter / X or LinkedIn and so forth, and Instagram. And what they found was that when a politician was sharing a message that was negative and attacking the outgroup, those messages were liked or forwarded at 2.7 times the rate of messages where the politician was being not expressing any kind of negative emotion, either neutral or positive emotion toward their in-group, toward their followers. So 2.7 times the rate. So that means when we go on social media, we're essentially seeing a virtual environment that's skewed negative. When also Chris Byron's research at Georgia State University, where she found that what's called the negative affective bias, not effective, but affective, like emotional, the negative affective bias of email, texting, electronic communication. What Chris found is that when a sender sends a positive message on email or text, it's an emotionally positive message. It's usually received by the recipient as being emotionally neutral. And when the sender sends an emotionally neutral message, it's usually received by the recipient as being emotionally negative. So there's this downward negative pull and slant and lens over everything we're seeing in virtually, whether it's social media, whether it's electronic email, texting. And unfortunately, this is the way most of us have become used to communicating. But it's not, I always say that email is efficiency mail. It's not emotional mail. When we have like a real, a message that may get some pushback that we may need to discuss, we got to do that in person or at least by phone. There's other research showing that phone contact is about the same. It's not quite the same, but it's pretty close to face-to-face communication. But as soon as you go textual, it all falls apart. In fact, there's a study on how we dehumanize each other. And when you ask someone to listen to a speech from someone of the opposition party, not the party they belong to, but the opposition political party, well, they tend to dehumanize that person if they read the message textually. But if they hear the message, just hearing the voice of another human being kind of disarms them, and they don't dehumanize nearly as much, if at all. So I think part of it is like we have to relearn how to love, which I think is true in this new current environment that we're living in, which has changed a lot. So it's technology. There's other factors too. I mean, look at the disparities between haves and have-nots. So 25 years ago, the average CEO in the U.S. was earning about 60 times the average employee in their own company or organization. It's now over 280 times higher, the CEO's salary based on versus the average employee in their company. So we're seeing a lot of disparities and a lot of reasons where people are saying, well, others don't care about me, so I'm just going to do the same thing. But if you look at this, there's a lot of research too on what's called the norm of self-interest. Stanford professor Dale Miller did this study where he found that most people believe that others are self-interested. And so if they're self-interested, I'm going to be self-interested too. But it's actually false. In fact, if you look, for example, if you give different people $20 and you say, hey, go buy something for yourself, or to another group of a few hundred people, you give them $20 and you say, hey, go buy something for someone else. Later that evening, you ask them, you ask them how they're feeling, and you also put some electrodes up to their brain. Well, what you find is that they're happier if they gave something to someone else than if they bought something for themselves. And the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part that experiences reward from a dopamine surge, we actually release more dopamine neurotransmitters into our bloodstream when we're helping someone else than when we're doing something for ourselves. So I think human nature is actually kinder than we believe. We just have to kind of re tap into it,
Well,
become reacquainted with it.
and I think that as you start to do things for other people, as you say, we feel better, but I think I would assume that that leads to greater ability to love. And I think that's so important. So as we're closing, what would be a thought that you'd like to share with the audience, kind of as a final thought?
Okay, sure. And is it okay if I first offer 2 free books to your viewers,
Oh, yeah,
listeners?
we're going to do that afterwards, but
Oh,
let's
we do
do
that
that
after.
first.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, so my final thought then, Doug, would be suffering and love are inextricably intertwined. They're connected with each other profoundly. So when you suffer, it actually teaches you who and what you love. It's because of our suffering that we even have values at all, for most of us. Some of that comes through the passion that emerges from suffering, some from the compassion, which is like passion, suffering, and calm is with in Latin. So it's like it's not to suffer with, which reduces our capacity to help someone else, but to be with others in their suffering. So I would say to your listeners, go out and think about what's caused you suffering in your life, because that's a key to helping you find your passion and to helping you find who and what you love.
great. Fantastic. So, all right, let's talk about the 2 free books and let's talk about how people can find you.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Doug. So the 2 free books I'd like to offer to your viewers, listeners, well, they're called The Myth of Happiness, How Your Definition of Happiness Creates Your Unhappiness. And the second is called The Myth of Friendship, How Your Misunderstandings About Friendship Keep You Lonely. And I'm actually one of the 2 top researchers in the world now on loneliness in organizations. So integrates a lot of that research and as well as stories. And the way you can get these 2 free books is very easy. You go to theartoflivingfree.org. So it's theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. So the way you can reach me is theartoflivingfree.org. And then if you go to theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books, you're going to get it. You put in your email, you get an email to confirm it, and then you get the download links. And if you like, you can stick around on the Art of Living Free. By putting in your email, you'll receive an article from me every couple weeks about love, forgiveness, relationships, leadership. And if you don't like, if it's not your thing, you can unsubscribe at any time, and you still have the books, which you can read on any e-reader or Kindle, or you can print them out.
And they are great books. I downloaded them and just went through them briefly, and it's amazing the thoughts and the ideas and the concepts you have there. So that's wonderful. And you know what? I have to say, it's amazing how people use their life experiences and become that individual that's making a difference in other people's lives. And obviously, what you're doing with your nonprofits and the extent that you're doing it is got to be making such a difference in people's lives. So kudos to you for that, Tony.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here, and I think you're doing that also with in so many ways with the work you're doing. And I know we focused on me, but we could have turned this around and all the good things you're doing, Doug. So appreciate you.
Well, and there's all these other topics I'd love to talk to you about. I think this topic of loneliness and loneliness versus aloneness would be an incredible topic to talk about, but maybe another time. So anyway, again, Tony, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it.
And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I look forward to having you join us again soon. So this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.